I'm James, and on behalf of S&T Geotronics LLC, I would like to thank you for supporting our Antikythera Kickstarter. Today is an exciting day. You probably received your big brown box that contains your kit. And today we're going to talk about turning this big brown box into something more like this. Probably not exactly like this, as this is a prototype, but it will be very, very similar. This is the full mechanism Antikythera, with all the dials and all the pieces and all the functions working. Along the way, the first thing we're going to build is the rotating assembly. The rotating assembly contains the inferior planet gear train and the superior planet gear train, which we'll go over. The superior planets are on top and the inferior planets are towards the bottom and are nested on the iconic gear. First things first, you'll need some basic tools. You'll need a pair of needle nose pliers, a number 1 and number 2 Phillips screwdriver, quite possibly a flat screwdriver, more than likely to use as a pry bar to unset something that you set too deep. A hammer is always useful. Never keep your pocket knife too far away. And you may need a little flat file to trim and adjust a rod at one point or another. You'll also need a block of wood of some sort to use to drive stuff against. And of course, I always find it's handy to have an arbor press, but not exactly necessary all the time. So now let's open up our box and start the process. So everything is conveniently put into trays. You have tray 1, which has our labeling and has a pair of cotton gloves, and inside here there should be a keychain or some other trinket as a token of our appreciation. And we'll set that to the side. We want to get to tray 3. And here's tray 2, which has your front plate and back plate and mid plate, which we're not ready for yet. And here we are at tray 3, which has our screws and bearings. And we have our axles and rods in this other container. We'll be needing that. So we'll get our screws and we'll get our axles, and then we're going to need to go down to grab some of our common parts. And tray 4 has our moon stuff. And we'll go to tray 5 and grab out our iconic gear. And we'll pull tray 5 out and go all the way to tray 6. And we're looking for our sun gears. And that looks like one right there. Sun 40. Sun 40. Nope, that's a Venus 40. There's the Sun 40. And here is the last Sun 40. There's 3 Sun 40 gears in here. We're looking for these 3 guys. And then we'll start assembling once I set all these back in. So we've got our iconic gear. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to put little bevels in these outer holes for our screw heads so that the screw heads don't sit above the plastic. And this is what we would use the number 2 screwdriver for, is to just kind of ream a little bit and make a little bevel countersink in there. But I'm going to cheat, which you also can too. This is a number 2 bit, and I'm going to speed the process up. You want to be careful is to not do too much, is to go all the way through, and you just want to have a nice little bevel in there. Now that that's done, we'll go on to the next step of the process. Next, we're going to start building up our sun gears. We're going to need these you're going to grab the bag of axles, and you're going to find the sun gear axles, 2 each. There's 2 of them in there, and you're going to get the sun gears with the round center holes, and we're going to put the axles in them with some bearings. So we're going to use the pocket knife to open the sun gear axle package, and we'll get us a sun gear axle out very carefully. And then we're going to get a couple of MF52ZZ flange bearings, and we don't want to make a very big slit because we don't want these guys getting everywhere. We just want to kind of squirt out 2 bearings to start. There's 1, and there's 2. Now we're going to grab our gear. This is the outer gear that has the drive rod hole, and we're going to press the bearings in there, which may take a little bit of force. And there's a couple different ways to do it. Sometimes you can do it with just pure pressure from your fingers. And then we're going to grab our sun axle, and we're going to put our sun axle into the bearing. We're going to do this on a block of wood with our needle nose pliers, and we're going to take our little hammer, and we're going to tap him in. And look at him when he starts to make sure that he's going straight, because it's real easy to bend these. Oh, he wasn't started correctly. Try again. This one's not wanting to cooperate. In which case we'll take the file and we'll turn it against the file a little bit and clean it up on the end. Then we'll try again. And this one is proving to be actually very difficult. Which isn't completely unheard of. That can happen. There, we've about got it tapped in. Just a little bit more. Sometimes it's better to have a metal backup to bang against, like that. And then we'll feel of it to feel that it turns nice and free. And that's made. And then we'll grab our next one and do the same process. So now I've put my bearings in the other sun gear with the round center hub. And I'm going to put the axle in. Now this one I put from the side that didn't have the text. On this one I'm going to put it in the side that has the text, because the gears, from the way they're cut, mesh better if they're put with the text alternating. They'll still work if you put them all right side up, but I find that it meshes better and turns freer, because some of the gears will have a slight slope from the cutting process. And so then we're going to tap this axle into this gear from the opposite direction. We're going to verify that it turns freely. And then we're done with that step. Now that we installed our sun gear axles, we're going to go and find the planets and sun drive rods. There should be 4 of them in the package, and we're going to open this package up with a little slit where we can get one out, and we're going to install the drive rod into our outer sun gear. And we'll use the pliers, and we'll take, I like to have a board with holes in it that can take the axle, and you see this one's been well used. And then I'll take and tap my drive rod right in there, and it should be pretty much flush with it underneath. If you find you're sticking out a little bit, you can take the needle nose pliers and just adjust it right back to where it's flush, just like that. And the next step is we'll be putting these into the iconic gear. Alright, you're going to take your iconic gear. You beveled this side for the screws, so now we're going to use the unlabeled side of the iconic gear, and we're going to put our outer sun gear with the drive rod to the outside, and we're just going to tap it into the gear like that. And then we're going to get our inner one, and we're going to do the same on the inner hole, and we'll tap it into our gear like that. And sometimes it works better to have the block of wood under it than it does the plastic table to get it flush, just like that. And you'll see you want these just about flush with the outside. That'll take a little more. There it went, and there it's flush. Now that we've successfully installed these 2 gears, we're going to want to test to make sure they spin freely, which they do. And then we're going to want to go to tray 3 and grab our 6mm hex keyed axle and our 12mm keyed hub and our 64 teeth link connector gear out of tray 6. We're going to take this keyed hub and we're going to press it into our 64 teeth link connector gear. And then we're going to put our spacer on that holds them out where he's supposed to be. And then this assembly pops into the iconic gear. And this drives the whole back assembly of the device. Then we're going to grab our 6mm hex keyed hub axle and slide it in there and verify that it turns nice and free in there. If it doesn't turn free, you can actually use the ridges on the 3D print to clean the inside hole out a little bit, and that should loosen him right up to where he turns as expected. There's these 3 little spacers on him. We're going to grab the first spacer and run it all the way down to the bottom of the, and then we're going to grab our inner 40T sun gear and we're just going to put it on the hex shaped part of this. And I like to put these all together with the drive rod facing out, and I prefer this one will be installed riding up, which is against this one, which is riding down, which is against that one that's riding up. And there we have our sun gear assembly, and we verify that it turns freely, which it does. Now that we got our sun gear train done, we're going to move on to Mercury. We're going to grab our Mercury 104 tooth gear and our little tiny Mercury, what is it, 33 probably? Mercury 33. And we're going to assemble that. But don't forget to put one of these spacer washers on top of the Sun 40 so it has a spacer on top of it and below it. This keeps the gears properly spaced apart where they don't drag on each other. It would work without it, and we're going to look at this gear real careful to make sure that the teeth are all clean and that they don't have an excessive amount of goop in between them. And there are a couple that have a little bit of excessive stuff in them, and we're just going to take the pocket knife and clean that right out. Just like that, and we'll inspect some more, and we'll see there's a couple more. They'll usually still work even if you leave the goo in, but it'll cause a lot of drag and make a lot of racket when it runs, and it won't run smooth. So you want to make sure that all the little flecks of material are out of the gear. And then the Mercury 104 just simply goes right on top of these on the hex shaft, which isn't always as straightforward, but goes on there, pop, and there it is. And then you'll see that is just like that. And then we'll put our last spacer on so it doesn't get lost in the fray. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to find our Mercury axle in our bag, and we'll get it out. There's only one, so we don't have to worry about losing other ones. And we'll get our Mercury axle out. Maybe. With a little luck. Just like that. And we'll get 2 more of the MF52ZZ flange bearings for our Mercury 33 gear. There's one. And there's 2. And we'll install the bearings into the Mercury 33 gear, just like we did the Sun gears. By just pressing them into the gear, just like that. And there they are. Now our Mercury 140 is face up, so we'll probably want this one to be face down. And we'll want it right here where it goes. First we'll put our axle and our Planet drive rod in. So now we're going to go back, find our spot on our block where we drove our axle in our other gears, because it's already got a nice little inset for the bearing. That's the nice part about using a block of wood, is it makes a little pocket. And there goes the axle. Not too far. And that is one of the cruxes of dealing with this, is that sometimes you drop these things. And then we'll just drive that right into the gear. And we'll verify that it turns freely on there, which it does. Then I'll grab my other block of wood and find a spot where the axle goes into one of my holes that's in the wood. And I'll go up here and grab a Planet drive rod. And we will install the Planet drive rod into the Mercury 33 gear. Just like that. It went a little far on me, so I'm going to take the needle nose, I'm going to adjust it back just a little bit to where it's flush. Just like that. Now it's flush. And now we will drive it into its home position. Right here. And for this I'm going to go get a punch. Well, now I've got my punch. I should have added that to the tools to start with. But being the smart person that you are, you watched this video before you ever got going, so you know that we needed a punch. And now we're going to take the punch and we're going to drive that right into its spot where it's nice and flush. And then you'll see that we have a Mercury assembly and a Sun assembly that both roll. Alright, now that we have our Sun and our Mercury gear train installed on our iconic gear, we're going to move on to Venus. We're going to go to tray 6 and we're going to select our Venus 64 tooth gear, and we're going to select our Venus 40 tooth gear. The 40 tooth Venus gear with the hex hub just fits right over our Mercury 104, just like that. And that's done. And then we'll grab our Venus 64 tooth and we'll grab our Venus axle shaft out of our axles and shafts. Grab the knife, put a little slit in there, and then force this Venus axle back out, undoing all the hard work of MT, probably Mark. And we'll grab a couple of the 52 ZZ bearings out of the bearing pack, and we'll put them carefully into our Venus 64 tooth gear, just like we did all the others. I've got really thick thumbnails, so I usually get away with this. You may not be so lucky. You may end up having to actually put the one in the gear side and then take the small punch and literally pop the other one in, which is also an acceptable way of doing it. And then we're going to look at it. We're going to see that our Venus 40 tooth has his riding up, so we're going to install the 64 tooth with the riding down. So we're going to come in here and put the axle in the riding side of it. And the good thing about the Venus axle is it's a little longer, so it's generally easier to deal with than the Sun axles in the other. We'll feel that until it goes into its little divot where our bearings have been going into. And then we'll just simply tap it right into the bearings. We'll verify that it spins more or less freely and true. And then we'll, better to put the Planet drive rod in first. Otherwise we'll have a situation. So we'll grab us another Planet drive rod. And we'll put it into our Venus 64 tooth gear with a little luck. Just like that. Not quite flush. Let's give it a little bit more. And there we are, flush. And now we'll take and we'll drive it in to its home position. Just like that, nice and flush. And you'll see that we have a completed gear train. Oh, our sun gear is not quite set deep enough. So let's just give them a tap like that. More better. And that's what we should have. Just like that. They should all turn. And there is our Inferior Planet gear train. So now we're going to visit tray 3 and grab the bag of standoffs. And we're going to open the bag and we're going to fish out the 24.5 millimeter standoffs. They may not all be labeled. At least one or two of them will be labeled, but they didn't all get labeled for some reason. But they'll all be the same length and same size. They'll all be 9 millimeters square by 24.5 millimeters long. And these are for the date plate. And then we're going to close our bag of standoffs back up so they don't get lost and set them back into tray 3. And then we're going to go open up our screws. And these here will be put on with number 2 by 3/8 screws. You should have 32 of them in the package. Number 2 by 3/8. So we're going to put a little slit in the package, and we're going to fish out 4 of these screws with a little luck. 4. Then we're going to find our number 1 Phillips screwdriver, and we're going to go to these holes right here that are close together. The 4 holes that are close together. We're going to put our screw in. We're going to verify that it's below. We countersink where it's below the surface, and then we're going to put on some standoffs. Just like this, and we'll put our little 3/8 screw into our standoff and get it nice and snug. And that's that. They're all on. And you can turn them to where they all look like they're facing a similar direction. Not all the sides look exactly the same, but you do want to kind of take your screwdriver and lay against them to make sure that they're nice and straight with each other. That'll help in the final assembly. Next, we're going to get our inferior planet axles and our date plate. Now, there's 3 axle rods, and you're going to want to take and slide them in and out of each other. They're nesting axles, and you want to slide them inside each other to kind of knock down any burrs that were on the 3D print where they turn fairly easily. They don't have to turn perfectly freely, but freer is better. You'll see that they're all at different heights. So the lowest one goes on the Sun, and the next lowest one goes on the Mercury, and the highest one goes on the Venus. And you'll just slip them over the planet drive rods like that, and then turn your date plate till it lines up with the screw holes. Make sure that they don't slip off of your planet drive rods. And then you'll get 4 more of these 3/8 screws out of the package and attach the date plate to the standoffs. So we'll install our number 2 by 3/8 screws into the date plate, holding them to the date plate standoffs. And the last one, just screw them right down. The date plate was 3D printed with the countersink already in it, so they just screw in, and there you have the inferior planet assembly. At this point, I prefer to put the main axle in, and I just poke it through the plastic and retrieve it, and prefer to start trying to get this main axle in. It may be kind of stiff. There's a couple different ways to cheat. One way is to get your handy dandy drill motor and install it so that the long flat spot is on the outside, and literally use it as a reamer. The flat spots will ream out any little pieces of plastic that impede it. And I give it a couple, 2 or 3 reams through this assembly that way, and then I wipe off the goop, and then I go from the back side a couple of 2-3 times until it turns freely, and that makes this process a lot easier. But I go ahead and install this axle. The larger flat spot goes in that way, and there's all the goop that it reamed out. You may just want to pull it on through a couple of times to make sure that it gets all the goop out. And then we'll leave that in there. That way we know that all this stuff stays lined up. And now we're done completely with that, and we'll move on to the inferior planets. Inferior planets? No, we're going to do superior planets. We already did the inferior planets. So now we're going to visit trays 6, 5, and 3. we're going to grab from our tray 6 our 60 tooth Mars and our 74 tooth Mars. These two guys. We're going to grab our Jupiters, our 53 and our 86 tooth Jupiter. Or is it 86? I don't know. Need new glasses. And then we're going to grab our two Saturns. Our 59 and 60 tooth Saturn. And then we're going to go to tray 5 and we're going to grab our Superior Planet plate. And we're going to grab our big axle that goes with our Mars. That's our Mars axle. And then we're going to grab this little bag of pieces, of 3D printed pieces, which has our Jupiter and Saturn axles in it. So we're going to visit our little plastic bag of 3D printed parts. We're just going to empty it out into the cavity where the Superior Planet plate was so that they all kind of stay there. And we're going to have our Mars axle, our Jupiter axle with a little spacer, and our Saturn axle, the smallest one, and it has a little thicker spacer, but it's still small. And then we have our parts, our laser cut and 3D printed parts for this part, and we're going to go and we're going to start assembling our gear assemblies and bearings to start with. Oh, once again I'm getting ahead of myself. The first thing we want to do with this stuff is we want to go ahead and ream our Superior Planet plate holes out where our screw holes are countersunk. And we can do this with the number 2 screwdriver by going in there and giving it about 6 quarter turns, pressing real hard. And that will give you a reamed hole. But I'm going to cheat and resort to the handy dandy drill motor. Let's go forward. There we go. Better. And done. Alright, I've taken the liberty of getting 6 more of these 52 ZZ flange bearings out. And now I'm going to find the 3 Superior Planet gear axles. They'll be labeled Planet gear axle, 3 each. And these are actually for the Superior planets, and we're going to get those guys out. I think I'll take them out one at a time because I'm going to install them one at a time. And so I'll grab the Mars gear with the slot and we'll put 2 bearings in that. And then we'll do the same for Jupiter and the same for Saturn. Now that I've installed my flange bearings, I'll tap my drive axles in. These are almost getting long enough I can use my fingers instead of the pliers, which is much more reliable. And there's the Mars. And here's our Jupiter. Grab another one of these Planet gear axles. And then our Saturn. And the last Planet gear axle out of the package. have it. Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. Now we'll need to install some planet drive rods, which we still should have several. Planet and Sun drive rods, 4 each. So we have a Jupiter drive rod, which is specific to Jupiter, because it's a little longer. So we'll grab Jupiter, and we'll install his nice long slinky drive rod until he's flush. And there, he's just about flush. And give him one more little tap. There we go. And then we'll see what else we got here. Jupiter drive rod, planets and sun drive rods, Saturn drive rod. There he is. We'll grab him because he's a little bit short. We'll install him. I have to use the pliers for this one because it's shorter than my fingers are. I'm going to cheat. And there he is, nice and flush. And then our Mars drive rod is just a planet and sun drive rod. And we'll install it as well. I'm going to cheat again. And there we have our drive rods installed. Now we're going to go to our Superior Planet plate. And we're going to get ready to install all this stuff together where it works. Now we're going to visit tray 6 again, and we're going to grab the Superior Planet axles, and we're just going to give them a quick little kind of reaming, self-reaming to make sure they turn freely on each other. And we're going to go into tray 6 and we're going to grab this little Superior Planet plate bushing, and we're going to put it onto the outside of this. That allows the hexagonal shaft to turn inside the Superior Planet plate. And these here gears will actually work our Superior Planets. And then we're going to go ahead and set that in so we can see that it all spins and works like it's supposed to. And now we're going to start the process of putting these guys together. So we got our Mars 76, and we're going to put this spacer bushing over the axle, and we're going to run it down till it grabs the gear. And if it's too tight, it won't spin freely, and we can actually push it up where it doesn't spin good, and then just kind of give the gear a little wobble, and it'll return to spinning like it's supposed to. And then we're going to grab our Jupiter, and we're going to put its axle hub in and make sure that it spins on it. See, that's a little tight. We may want to inspect our axle to make sure that it doesn't have a seam or something binding it. And it's still a little tight. So I'm just going to take the pocket knife and just very gently go inside the hub of the gear and clean it up a little bit. And then we'll take some sandpaper and roll it up, which may or may not be as easy as it looks. And we'll just kind of give that a clean out. A little bit loose is way better than a little bit too tight. So we want to make sure that that spins on there good. And then we'll put our bushing on there and verify that spins good. And then we'll go grab Saturn. And Saturn seems to be pretty darn acceptable the way he is. So we'll just put his bushing on like that, which can be a kind of a challenge on Saturn, but and there we have it. And then Mars. On with assembly. So we're going to take our Mars gear with the slot and we're going to put it on our Mars 79 tooth, and we're going to line this all up, and we're going to drive this axle into the other axle, which should fit nice and snug. And then we're going to take and we're going to put our drive pin where it fits into our gear. We're going to realize that our slot in our gear needed to be cleaned out a little bit. So we'll just kind of push it over to the side. And we'll take and clean our slot with the pocket knife just a little bit. Then we'll run it back around till it lines up. And realize that's much more better. And then we'll do the same, which can be a challenge with Jupiter, because Jupiter likes to lose its little bushing. We'll just go ahead and drive that on in, just like that. Verify that it turns freely. Make sure our slot works good. Yep, it does. And then we'll put him on like this. And our bushing. And there's that assembly. It works good. And then we'll come to Mr. Saturn. And we'll give him the same treatment. All right. So now we're going to grab the Jupiter assembly. Make sure that that little washer's on it, because it's important. It gives you the space for this gear off of the planet plate. And then we're going to insert it into the medium-sized hole and ensure that it still spins. I like to leave my planet rods facing out. And I got ahead of myself. We're going to put these planet gear axles, I put the bearing on it, but really the Saturn 57 tooth goes on, and the Jupiter 76 tooth goes on, like that, and then the bearing goes on. But not even like that. Between the 76 tooth the inner gear has its spacer printed onto it. So we put that gear on, and then we'll put a spacer. Like this. And then we'll put this gear on. That's up, that's down, like this. And then another spacer. And then our bearing. There, that should be more like right. And then we'll put this in, and we'll see that it mates up with our Jupiter. At this point, it's handy to have something to hold the plate up like this, like another piece of 2x4. And then, once we get Jupiter in, we'll get our Saturn assembly, and we'll put our Saturn assembly in. I like to line the axles up where the outside of the concentric is facing that. That way I can just slide it right in there and hopefully find the hole where it goes. With a little pressure, it should just pop in. Again, it's kind of a physical challenge sometimes, like that. And there's that. And then we're going to go and grab our Mars assembly. Mars is a little bit different than the others. We'll slip him in just like that and pop him into his hole if we can. He's kind of big, so Mars can actually be really stubborn sometimes, but it always goes. Then we're going to grab Mars with our needle nose pliers, because Mars doesn't always line up freely with everybody else. It's actually supposed to mate with this gear right here, and we're going to take and turn it in its hole, and you'll see that you'll bring it in where it mates with that center gear, and usually about a 90 degree, about 3 o'clock is where it's going to be. The others seem to work best all the way as far out as you can get them. Just like that. And there's your Superior Planet assembly. Now we're going to flip it all over and let it rest on the block, and we're going to get a little bit of the super glue, and we're just going to go around these dowels, these axle dowels, just like that, to make sure they move. Don't move anymore. We're just going to glue those in, just like that. On this one, be very careful not to get any glue in that notch because it can run through and lock your gears up. So we're just going to go 2/3 of the way around with it, like that. And then we're going to allow this to dry. Well, we go find our Superior Planet Plate standoffs. So while your glue is drying on your Superior Planet Plate, you're going to find the 4 53.5 millimeter long standoffs for the Superior Planet Plate. These go Superior Planet Plate to main gear. Since the Superior Planet Plate's drying, we're just going to go ahead and attach them to the main gear. Just like we did the date plate standoffs. Alright, before you glue it, you should actually verify that this all spins freely. And this one spins adequately. And now that it's glued, we're going to install it. We've put our standoffs on our iconic gear, and we're going to install the Superior Planet assembly to the Inferior Planet assembly. And the way we do that is we make sure that the Saturn gear package is opposite of where Mercury is. Mercury, you hold Mercury on top, and you hold Saturn over here on the bottom, and you slide your assembly together like this, and then you take your 4 more of your number 2 by 3/8 screws, and you very carefully screw the Superior Planet Plate down to the standoffs. And now, congratulations, you have a rotating assembly all ready to install into your device. Now it's time to sit back, let the glue dry, the dust settle, and have a beer. Alright, so now we're going to set our rotating assembly aside on a shelf where hopefully it doesn't get messed with. And we're going to go and we're going to delve into the front and back and mid plates. What we need out of here is the mid plate, which is the smallest one, because we're going to start assembling that, which drives the rest of it. Now's a good time to consider using the cotton gloves, but right now everything has a film on it that's protecting it. So we'll just go ahead and delve in here and grab our mid plate, which looks like that. And then we'll seal this package back up so it doesn't get damaged, and put it back into the container it was in, which should be the second tray or first tray. Now we're going to assemble our double gear assemblies. There's 2 double gear assemblies. They both have a 38 tooth, and one has like a 48, and the other is a 38 and a 53 tooth gear. And we're going to assemble these guys, and we're also going to need these little spacers that go between them. That gives them the proper distance to stand off of each other. There's a couple different things you can try to do to make this go easier. But basically, you make the sandwich out of the gear and the spacer, and you get it as close to lined up as humanly possible. Sometimes it's easier to use a little cheater screwdriver or something like that, but the easiest way to do it is we're going to put these together with set screws. And here's the set screws. They're M 3.5 by 7 set screws, and there's a 1/16 Allen key in there. Actually, I believe that they're an English set screw, and that someone pulled my leg on the metric size. And we're going to grab one of these out of here to start with. I'm going to grab this Allen key, This will be a little bit long explanation, but bear with me. So we're going to take our set screw, we're going to put it on the Allen key, and we're going to start screwing it into our gear. And it should fit adequately into this hole in this gear where it will thread in and self-tap itself. Should being the key word. If you find this is too difficult, or you don't have the stomach for it, you can always go in the hardware store and get you a tap. And the tap is it seems to work, is so small I can't read it. It's probably like a 6 by 32. And then we'll take the tap, we'll load it into the drill motor, and we'll just take and tap these holes like this. And then our set screw will thread into the gear much easier. And so what I'll do is I'll run these through till they're just a little bit past flush and you can feel the dimple of the set screw sitting out. Then I'll take the second set screw and install it as well. If you tap the holes in the gear, they go in much easier. But like I said, they will thread into the gear without tapping. And then I take the spacer and I set the spacer right there where the set screw just peeks out, and just kind of take my thumbnails and press it on. And then I'll take the big gear and I'll put it on over there and get it to where it lines up. Need a little bit more set screw sticking out. Where I can feel that it made. And then I'll take the other one and give it just a fuzz more too, where I can feel it really good. And then I'll take a clamp, come in here, and just clamp the thing together so that it doesn't move. Easier said than done. Probably better to use a vice grip plier. Or you can use the needle nose to grab it and hold it together. And then get your set screw started in the next gear, which is sometimes easier said than done. The easiest way to do these double gears is to take a small punch and line up the holes like this. And when you have your holes lined up, to take and put this thing in a vise that holds them all together. This is how I do them when I do a bunch of them, to keep my sanity. And I'll take my punch and I'll get them as lined up as I can. And then I'll take my set screw and I'll drive my set screw into the first hole. Just like that. And then I'll flip it over. And find my holes. And get them as lined up as I can. And then I'll put it in the vise. And squeeze it together real good. And put my second set screw in. And if it's real stiff to go in because you didn't thread it with a tap, you may want to use the Allen key long ways, and it'll go ahead and drive it right on in. And you want to drive it in where the set screw is just below the surface on both sides. Just like that. Then you have a gear assembly ready to go. That simple. Now that we've got our double gears assembled as double gears with the spacers in them, we're going to put the bearings in them. It takes 4 bearings for 2 double gears. And we'll be putting them in the same old way we've been putting everything else in. I'll just pop that one and that one. And I'll put the one in the back. Same way. And they fit nice and snug in the gear. And then we're going to find our double gear axles, which are in this kit. Moon Drive double gear reducer axles, 2 each. And there's 2 of them. So we're going to grab our knife and we're going to get them out of the package. Just like that. And then we'll install them into these gears. The double gear axles go in from the side of the big gear to the small gear. And we're going to very carefully tap them in. It's real easy to bend one of these. So you just want to very carefully tap them in. And they fit in the bearing pretty tight usually. Almost there. There it is, sticking out the other side a little bit. Oof, that's mighty tight. Let's give it a little more and get it all the way down. that one, and then we'll drive in this one. There's that one. Now that we've secured our mid plate and we've got our double gears made, we're going to look at our mid plate and we're going to see that at the bottom we have a pattern of 4 holes, and at the top where the Metonic is we have a pattern of 5 holes. And this pattern of holes is on the crank side, and we want to make sure that we have it facing us this way, where this is on your left hand side, and your big 3853 double gear goes on top right there, and the smaller 3848 goes on the mid plate right there. And we're going to take and we're going to tap the axles in, and we're going to tap them in so they're flush with the bottom of the mid plate. And I'm going to set them up here and use the top of the press as an anvil and just tap it right in like that, so that my gear is stuck right into the mid plate. We'll come here and do the 3848 the same way. I'm going to verify that they roll good. And then we're going to go find the support for them. It's in a 3D printed tray. Sorry, I got ahead of myself. You're going to want to peel the film before you actually put the gears down. So I'm going to end up on this using the flat screwdriver to pry these gears back off of this plate. And they're going to come right off of their axle, which is fine too. And I'll peel the film over. And that one came out of the plate. And I'll peel my film, and then I'll just simply reinstall everything. And we'll put this one back on too. And we'll take and tap him down with the piece of wood so that we know that we got him all the way on like he's supposed to be. Let's turn the wood where the other one's off, and we'll tap it down, and then we'll verify that it turns like it's supposed to. Give it a little bit of room with the screwdriver, get them both spinning good, and then we're going to put our gear support on, and it fits on top of these axle shafts just like that, and we'll have to actually tap it down on there. It's nice to have a little anvil to do this with. And I'm just going to use the top of my arbor press and pop that on just like that. Verify they both still turn freely. And then we'll get some number 2 by 3/8 screws, and we'll attach our gear support onto the mid plate. Now I've got my 4 screws out. I'm going to take and I'm going to countersink these holes just a little bit so the heads don't stick out so much. And I'm going to cheat again doing it. You can countersink them using the Phillips screwdriver method by putting the Phillips screwdriver in and just kind of reaming the hole out. Or you can cheat and use the electric drill. Back and kind of break it off. put our number 2x3/8 screws into here. And this support, make sure that our gears are supported on both sides, because they're going to turn the heavy load of all the moon and the Metonic and the other parts of the back of the Antikythera. Now we're going to peel the film off of the acrylic on the other side. And this is where you might want to consider putting on the cotton gloves to prevent fingerprints. A note about cleaning your fingerprints off of the acrylic. Don't use alcohol or Windex. Either one may cause the acrylic to crack uncontrollably and ruin your project. Use mild dish soap diluted with water and wash it and then dry it with a soft cloth towel. That's the best way to clean acrylic. Throw the trash away. Now we're going to go back to probably tray 6, and we're going to grab our Metonic drive axle bushing, which looks like this, and we're going to go to tray 3, and we're going to grab the moon drive bushing, and we're going to glue them into this mid plate. And the Metonic axle bushing goes right here in this hole, and the moon drive bushing goes here in this hole on the other side, and it serves to hold our 127 tooth gear at the proper distance. But we don't want them being wishy-washy and moving around and coming out once the thing is in service. So we're going to take a little bit of the super glue and put a little bit of super glue on this bushing, and we're going to glue it into the mid plate, just like that. And we'll use a little bit of thumb pressure to make sure our glue distributes as good as it can. Doesn't have to make full contact. Just hold it there for a while until it kind of sets up, and it'll happily hold that thing in there for a long, long time. But it takes a while with plastic to start setting up. For this next assembly, now that we've got our 2 bushings glued into our mid plate, we might want to go to tray 3 and pull out this Open Antikythera flash drive and go on there and find the Metonic drive axle assembly PDF and print it out. This will give you the order, the big gear, the spacer, the small gear, the spacer, and the bigger gear, and the drive axle, of how this goes together. And it'll show you the parts and what they look like, because this is going to start to get a little more complicated, if at all possible, but we try to put all these PDFs of this on this flash drive, as well as some of the design files in case you need to 3D print something for yourself. And then we're going to find the Metonic drive axle, which is this one in the parts bag, and we're going to free it. Be free. Yay! And then we're going to start assembling this. So you're going to have the big Metonic gear that is going to ride against that 58T, and the axle is going to go through the bushing, but we're just going to put the gear on the axle for right now, and we'll just take and bump the axle into the gear. And I'm actually going to put it over a hole. Actually, there's a hole right there. We're going to drive it all the way down to the bottom of the flat spot. Just like that. To where the flat spot's even with the gear. And then we're going to find this little stiffener. There's a little stiffener that can go on the end of this. And that will be over here. That's the spacer. That's not the stiffener. Need a tool to get these out. Those aren't the stiffener for the Metonic. Alright, the stiffener for the Metonic gear is actually the same as the 4mm spacer. And we're going to install it on the end of the gear. And we're going to take just a drop of super glue and we're going to super glue this spacer to the gear, because we can, and it's going to make the gear more solid on the axle. And we'll just take and we'll just tap that down against the wood, and that'll just glue on just like that, and we'll allow this assembly to dry. So we do the best we can to label these gears, but some of them are so small that the writing on them is really hard to see, and you may need a magnifying glass. You're looking for the 15T MET, which is that guy, and there's another 15T EXE for Exeligmos or whatever, and it's the same gear, it's just labeled differently, and if you happen to mix them up, it'll work. And you want the 27T Metonic, which is this one. They're both in tray 4. And you're going to need your second 4mm spacer. So what we're going to do now is we're going to continue assembling this Metonic drive axle, which meshes with that 53T double gear. And we're going to take our block of wood, and we're going to start by pushing our 15-tooth Metonic gear over the flat spot of the shaft. We can turn it to face us and then turn the flat spot on the gear to face us, and it's probably easier to put him riding side down. And we're going to have to find a tubular thing to go over it, or actually press the gear down with something that's a tubular punch that can hold the axle. Like a socket, for example, would be good, but this one's a little too large. Something that will work. Press it. So I'm actually going to use a blind axle jig, but you can use a small 1/4-inch socket that's a deep well, and just drive this gear right down the shaft, just like this. You want to drive it all the way down until it's flush with the other gear, and it'll tighten up and have a little bit of drag. And then we're going to take our flat screwdriver and we're going to get under it just a little bit and loosen it just a fuzz so that this assembly spins freely. That might be a little bit excessive. Might go back and tighten it up. It's just a fuzz. And there we have it. That's just about right. See, that spins really well. Then we're going to find our 4mm spacer. And we're going to install it with the flat spot on the axle. If I can see the flat spot. Which is right there. Then we'll take our jig and we'll drive it down the axle to meet our gear. And this is going to give us the space for our 27-tooth gear, which we're going to align the flat spot of the gear with the flat spot of the shaft. And once again, we'll take our tool and we'll just drive our gear right on down the axle until he butts up against the 4mm spacer. And then we have one more piece that goes on there, which is a guide. It's kind of a donut shaped thing. And this guides the moon gear to keep the moon gear turning straight with the rest of everything else. And it also has a flat spot in it for this shaft. And we'll line it up on this shaft. And then we'll drive it down with everything else. Just like that. And now our Metonic drive axle is complete, except for one last little thing, a bearing. And we're going to grab up one of our 52ZZ bearings, and we're going to put the flange side towards the inside of the shaft, and we're going to drive that bearing right on that shaft with everything else. And we may want to actually push the bearing right up against the flange of the shaft, so I'll find myself a convenient hole in my wood that I've been using to do that, and I'll pop it from the other side. And push that bearing right up where it goes. Just like that. That bearing will go into the back mechanical plate, and it'll hold all these gears nice and straight when they turn. Now we're going to assemble the moon drive 124 or 127 tooth gear and the little 24 tooth gear that drives it with the moon 127 tooth axle, which is this one right here. We're going to free him out, and we'll install this. So the long side of this axle goes into the 24 tooth gear. So we're going to set our 24 tooth gear up. We're going to line up our flat spot with him, and we're going to take the hammer and just tap them right in, and we'll find a little hole to go over. We'll continue to drive this axle in this gear just like that until he's up flush, and then he gets a stiffener. And the stiffeners are in tray 6 in the corner. And there's several of them, and they're all the same. You'll just need one of them for this. And I give him, I'll take and I'll clean any plastic that pushed out from the axle off. And I'll give him just a little drop of the super glue. The reason is because this is a fairly small gear and it's turning a large gear. It has a lot of torque on it. And so I want this stiffener to be in there to kind of help out, keep him nice and snug on the axle where he doesn't start turning and acting weird. So we're going to put this little stiffener on. We'll line it up with the flat spot on the axle. And it's actually a little stiff going on from this side, but I want the flat side against it. So I'm going to very carefully try and line them up. Then take the hammer and just arbitrarily knock him on. And he should just mate right up just so beautifully like that. And then this axle assembly goes into this bushing, and we may want to take and actually work it in there a little bit to make sure that the middle of the bushing doesn't contain any residue from 3D printing. And we'll push the axle in and out several times, and that'll, where the keyway's cut on it, will help us to clean that hole out to make sure that we have a frictionless bearing surface in there, or as nearly frictionless as we can get. And once you get it where it spins like that, you're good. We'll take and put our 24 tooth on this side where he mates with the 48 tooth, and see that he turns freely. And then we'll turn the assembly upside down like this, and we'll install our 127 tooth gear.
No spacer.
No spacer, no nothing, just right there on the bushing, and just knock him right on. And we're just a little fuzz tight, which is actually a feature at this point almost, but you'll see that it makes it a little hard to turn. So we're going to adjust him just a fuzz with the screwdriver. We want ever so tiny bit of slop where it just turns freely. And there we have it. And I'm going to I'm actually going to knock this shaft down a little bit with a punch, because I'd rather have a little bit more in the 127 and a little bit less in the 24. And he tightened up on us, but he came all the way through nice and good. Actually, that's really nice. And that should just spin just as nice and free as can be. So now we're going to install this Moon 32T gear on the main shaft, which is kind of an interesting thing. I haven't found a good way to do it yet. We're going to have to do a scary thing. We're going to pull the main shaft out of the rotating assembly so that we can put the gear on it. And we're very carefully going to set that down. We don't want anything to move around in there. Then we're going to take our Moon 32T gear and we're going to set it in here on top of that big 127 tooth gear. We're going to take our shaft, our main shaft, and we're going to drive it into our Moon 32T. Just like that, nice and solid. We're going to look at the back of it to make sure we went all the way through. And it may have grabbed a little bit of fluff from the gear. And we're going to look at it to make sure it's up against the flat of the axle, and it looks pretty good. Then we're going to take this little 1/2 millimeter washer and slide it down the moon axle like that, the main axle. Then we're going to take this whole menagerie and we're going to slide it back into our rotating assembly very carefully. And then take our rotating assembly and line it up with the square notch in this shaft, which works, but it's real tight and may take a little bit of finagling to get it on there. And then you'll have this middle assembly assembled just like that, and it pops in. And now when you turn this, it's going to turn these other gears just like that. We're gonna run everybody out straight like they're supposed to be, and then we're gonna lay this down like this, and we're gonna get our white gloves wherever they may be, and we're gonna put on our white gloves because we're gonna start touching our front plate. And we don't want to fingerprint stuff up. That's why we put white gloves in. It's for all you people that are particular. For some of us that aren't particular. And then we're going to peel the inside film off of our front plate. So our front plate has the engraving side, which is the front, and then the slick side, which is the inside. We're going to grab this plastic off the inside, and then we're going to make sure that our bushing is on our shaft here for the Superior Planet plate, to stand it off from our front plate so it doesn't scrub. Then we're going to very carefully line this up and get this to go on. Easier said than done, and there he is. He popped down on there, and now it's standoff time. We're going to get our 4 73.5 millimeter long standoffs, and we're going to get 8 of these number 2 by 3/8 screws out of the bag, which becomes trickier with the white gloves. Now that we've got our screws, we can put our standoffs in. You can optionally take and ream these holes in this acrylic out a little bit, but I find that I just would rather just leave the screws standing out a little bit on the front plate. But if you're going to use a skin, I would suggest going ahead and countersinking them. In fact, that's probably a good idea. We'll just go ahead and do it. So I'm going to take this back off. It will go on and off pretty easily. So, not thinking about what I'm doing all the time, I'm going to go ahead and countersink these holes just a little bit. And of course I'm going to cheat and use the drill. It just makes for a nicer appearance in the end. And now I'm going to go ahead and put this back on, understanding that this Metonic axle is on top, and now we'll take and put our screw in the screw hole, and we'll get our standoffy, and we'll attach our standoff, and we'll do all 4 of them on top and try and get our standoff where it's kind of straight and nice. Now, a lot of you say that we didn't use pins and dowels to put this together, and it's our belief that Archimedes designed the Antikythera, and after he made all the pins and dowels and assembled the Antikythera mechanism, he went back to his drawing board and invented the screw right away. And that's why I don't have any apologies for using screws in our device. Now that we got that part done and the top plate screwed on, I'm going to flip this thing over very carefully and set it on these boards, which is okay because the front is still protected by its protective film. And I'm going to take this and I'm going to screw the mid plate to these standoffs that are going to hold it at the correct distance from the back plate, from the front plate to the mid plate. And later on, before we do this, we should probably put our back plate standoffs on the mid plate. So we'll fish those out. Now I'm going to pull this whole thing apart again after I so carefully fit it together, and try not to lose my little spacer. And I'm going to put these back plate standoffs on real quick. No need to worry about countersinking these holes unless you just want to for the practice. And these are the shortest standoffs. They're 31.5 millimeters long. And we're going to just screw them in. Just like so. All 4 of them, which is going to use up 4 more of our glorious little screws. Now that I've installed my back plate to mid plate standoffs, we can go ahead and install this. Sorry for being out of sequence on some of this, but that's just the way it is. And we'll slide that back in very carefully, and then we'll attempt to line this thing back up with our mid plate and our square hole, which is very tight. And this is getting more and more, and it'll pop in like that. And there it is. And now we're in good shape to go ahead and put these last 4 screws in. Our front plate to mid plate standoffs.
Go.
Well, and when we're doing this, we're going to make sure that our Metonic is on the top side and our Moon 127T is on the bottom side, and the serial number and S&T Geotronics Open Antikythera is on the bottom. So the 127T goes down here, and the Metonic goes up here at the top because the Metonic has more holes for more shafts. Because you have Metonic drive shaft and then you have the 3 shafts, and on the bottom you only have 2. So now we'll very carefully put these screws in as to not get my cotton gloves involved with the screw, and we'll put these down. And we'll tighten these down, make sure they're good and snug, but not too tight as to strip them out or break the acrylic. And now we can sit back for a minute and admire our work and have a drink, because we're about halfway done with the assembly process. Mark invented this thing and we're assembling it. We're doing our best. We haven't assembled a whole lot of them, but by golly, this is the first one that's supposed to be an organized assembly, and it's not always as organized as what we would like. And so you can look at our mistakes and learn from them, and hopefully you don't make as many mistakes. So now we're going to take and we're going to assemble the biggest moon gears, the 223 and the 188 or 144, whatever it is. And we're going to grab them out of the packing, out of tray 4. We're going to get these 2 guys. And then we're going to go to tray 3, and we're going to get the shim that shims between them. And then we're going to grab 4 of these set screws and our trusty little Allen wrench. And we're going to head over to the vise and assemble this. I'm also going to take my drill with my tap in it to tap the threads. Start with sit down here, right? So now I'm going to put this in the vise to hold these together nice and straight. And I'm going to try and get this as centered up as I can on the hole, so the hole's nice and straight through. And I'm going to take my drill with my tap, and I'm going to tap the threads in it to make it easier. I put my finger in the back because I don't want to tap completely through a whole lot. And then we'll put a set screw in this hole. Just like that. And then once this set screws in, just below the surface, we will take and go 180 degrees out and line up our holes. Use a skinny little punch for that. Then I'll set that in the vise to hold it, and I'll line it up, and I'll make sure these other holes are pretty well lined up as well. If all 4 holes line up well, then chances are you're right where you want to be. Snug that down. Take the tap and go in. I'll put my finger behind it to feel the tap when it's going through. By doing that, the tap is tapered and the other side of it doesn't thread all the way through. And when I put my set screw in, it kind of self-locks itself in there because the threads aren't all the way cut on the other side. And that makes the set screw become very stiff where it's unlikely to come out during operation. Alright, we'll give this just one more little tweak. And now we're all done. Our ring gear is permanently mounted to our 223 tooth moon gear. Now we have to build the the 50 and 52 tooth assembly on this and put the axle in it, and we'll mount it on our device. So now we're going to go to our tray of 3D printed stuff that we got out and get this little axle hub. And we're going to go over to tray 4 and we're going to grab our 50 and 52 tooth moon gear. One of them has a big hole that fits the hub and a place for a drive rod. And the other one has a place for a bearing and a slot for the drive rod to ride in. The 52 does. And we're going to get this assembly started. So we're going to put our moon 50 tooth with the larger hole on this little axle right here. We're going to verify it spins freely, and then put this little washer on it. This little washer separates it from the moon gear and keeps the gear at the proper space. And then we're going to come over here and we're going to give it a drive rod. Just like that. And then we're going to need a moon 52 drive rod, which is in here. We got 2 of them in here. That's generous. I hope we only need 1. I'm going to grab this guy out. We're going to find our needle nose pliers. And grab him. And then we're going to put him in there and just casually set him into the gear. If he wants to cooperate, if not. Just like that. Not quite all the way through, so I'll just go up to my anvil and get him driven in there where he seats well. And now he's nice and flush. And next, we're going to build our 52 tooth with a bearing and a shaft. We'll come over here, we'll grab our moon 52 gear axle. And a couple of the 52ZZ flange bearings. And the set screws just keep giving. Those are plain bearings. So we'll press our flange bearings into our moon 52 tooth bearing. We'll put 2 of those little flange bearings in there. And we'll give them a tap, make sure they're good and seated. And then we'll get our moon 52 axle and we'll put it in the bearing. We'll just tap it right on in. Just like that. Verify that it turns freely, which it does. That one really good. And then we'll take and assemble it into our hub. And I'll just tap it right on in. And it helps not to drop your stuff. And what I'm looking for is to have that axle seated right in there. Just a little bit more. Just a tiny bit more. And a little bit snug. And then we'll take our flat screwdriver and loosen them up just a skosh. If we can. That's why it's always nifty to have a steady little punch. Just for that purpose of getting it just right. And that's just right. So now we'll just slip our other gear back on. Put our spacer back in. And now we have a wobbly set of gears that makes the pin drives the first gear, drives the second gear, but since it's driven off center, it makes the speed of the gear a little bit variable. And then we'll come over here to our Moon 223 assembly, and we'll just snap that in just like that. We want to try to get our shaft where the ellipse is opposed away from the center hole.
I can't see.
We want this to be opposed away from the center hole for the time being. We'll pop it in just like that. Now we'll grab our other pair of moon gears that goes in the middle that drives this. So now we're going to go to our tray of 3D printed stuff, and we're going to get these three pieces. This little axle hub and this spacer and this inner axle. And we're going to assemble this. This little spacer axle goes right here in your Moon 223 on top. And this little axle, inner axle, with a key goes inside of it. And pops in. And then we're going to have our Moon 50-tooth gear with a keyed hub that's going to go on this as well. And all of this still comes out nice and easy. And now we're going to push this on through if we can. And we're going to add this Moon 32 to it and this little spacer, but first we got to get our axle pushed all the way through. And the easiest way to do this is to take something and like a socket. That one's too big. This one should be just the right size. And we'll tap this on down. Just like that. And we'll try not to drop it. And then we'll have this like this. We'll put it inside of our big gear and verify it turns nice and free. If it's not nice and free, you'll have to clean this hole out with some sandpaper a little bit. Put that in. Take your spacer. Put your spacer for your 32 tooth moon gear on there. And then we grab the 32. Inspect it real close and make sure there's no boogers. That's good. And we'll install our 32 tooth gear on the hub just like that. And then we'll give it just a tap to make sure our axle's centered up good. And then you can see that assembly works nice and free. Now we're going to go after the Moon 223T 50T inner shaft, and it actually is going to have a 32 on it. And now we have our little inner shaft. And our inner shaft goes in here, and we'll use it to actually clean this out. We're going to actually have to clean the inside of this hole out to make it fit good. So I'll probably just take this shaft and I'll put it in the drill. And I'll use the flat spot on the shaft to ream our 3D printed hole out to make sure it is free and fits good. And that should send us along on our way pretty quickly. Of course, you can also just manually push it through a time or two to make sure that we don't have any residual dust in there holding it up. We want this to turn nice and free in that hole and not cause any restriction. And so now we're going to have a 50 tooth gear, a Moon 50 tooth, and they'll go on here to drive this 52. So we're going to take on the long side of it, we're going to drive the shaft in the 50 tooth. Right up to the end of the keyway, and then our 50 tooth will fit in there, and turn our 52 tooth, and we'll verify that these two mesh well. And you can, if you don't like the way they're meshing, you can spin this around and this offset will tighten the 52 to the 50. That looks pretty much okay to me. Then we're going to come find another Moon 32 that goes right there, which is probably in tray 4 somewhere. Moon 32. There he is. And we'll put this Moon 32 on this shaft as well. And I'll just take and put it over the hole. Once I've lined the shaft up good with this flat spot. Over the hole, and we'll just drive them in. Make sure everything looks kosher. Yep, it's driving in correctly. Put it over the hole. And we'll drive the gear right on home. Needs to go a little bit further. And we'll make sure that it turns freely. A little bit more. sure that this assembly turns nice and free. And there we have it. Sure we have a little space between our gears. That looks good. And now we'll put on our flange bearings. We're going to get 2 more of these MF52ZZ flange bearings and put on there. We'll just tap this guy on. And we'll turn him over. And we'll tap this one on too. We'll probably use the metal anvil. Just like that. And now we have this assembly. And this assembly is going to come in here. And our bottom bearing is going to go in this hole. And our gear is going to nestle up with that other gear. Like that. And there's how that's going to fit into the final assembly. Just like now we've got all this assembled. We're going to glue this in. We're going to make sure that it engages on this side and that it's at a reasonable distance. And then we're going to glue this little piece in. So hopefully it never moves again. Until you detect a fissure in time. And naturally our glue is stopped up. Why? Because it can. So included in your kit somewhere is a paper clip. And it actually is going to serve 2 purposes. If your super glue stops up, you use your paper clip to unstop it. Later on we'll be cutting it into pins for the back needles. And so now that we have our glue fixed, we're going to glue this little hub into our 223 moon gear assembly. Just like that. Now we're going to let the glue dry. So now we're going to go here and we're going to grab our long through shaft out of the packing. There's 2 of them. We're going to get one which is going to become our Metonic shaft. We need our shaft and we need the Metonic 15 tooth gear. He'll be in tray 4. He likes to hide under other gears because he's really small. The way you can tell him is because he has a bigger hub in the middle. And you're going to need the Metonic 57 tooth and Metonic 53. And yes, this is 15T Metonic. It says so right on there. So these gears all go on in a stack. And we're going to put the 15T on first. Maybe, if we're lucky. And then the 57 and then the 53 on the bottom. So we want to come over here, and my good block of wood is already being used. I want to try to very carefully tap this 15T gear on to our shaft. Now I'll turn them around and try again. And there he's through. And then we'll get some of our spacers. And we'll put a spacer on there.
Show me.
A little spacer out of the 3D printed parts that fits in there. And then we want our 57. Tap that in the 57, get them through a little more. And then we'll get to the other spacer. him on. Just like that. And then we'll get our 53. And we'll put our 53 on. And we want to push our shaft just through the 53. So we have a 15T, a spacer, a 57T, another spacer, and a 53. And we want our shaft just pushed just right at flush, coming through just a little bit. One more tap probably. Just like that. And then we'll have a single MF52 flange bearing. That's going to go on like that. And that'll sit on our Metonic shaft. And then we'll need the other bearing. Now this shaft is just a little loose in this bearing. So I'm going to take my Metonic shaft and I'm going to tap the end of the shaft like that. And that should tighten our bearing up on there. Yep, just right. And this assembly fits in here. In that hole just like that. And it's driven by this tiny gear down there. And this gear is just above that. So let's push him down on the shaft just a fuzz. Just because he seems a little tall. And so we'll adjust it just a tiny shade. We got just a little further through than we needed to be. And there, that looks perfect. Just enough to clear the bearing, about 1/2 millimeter, and then he should fit in there just like he's supposed to. And the gear's clear, and he fits. There's one more thing that goes on this shaft, and that's our little bit larger bearing, the F68683ZZ, which is a 3 millimeter flange bearing instead of a 2 millimeter flange bearing. On the inside, we'll grab one of these guys out, and we'll put him right on this shaft like that. And we'll tap him right up flush. We'll use a socket to set him in there, and then we'll just drive him up flush with the end of the shaft. And now our Metonic shaft has 2 bearings that it can spin freely on, and we'll just put him right where he goes in his hole, and he's there ready to have his needle put on once the back plate's there. We're going to prepare the Callippic idler assembly. So we're going to have to get a blind axle 3 millimeter out of the bag. There's 4 of them in there. We're going to get one of those. And we'll release them. Bloop. And we'll pull them out. And there's our, this will become our Callippic idler axle. We're going to go to tray 4. And we're going to grab the Callippic idler 60-tooth gear and the Callippic 12-tooth gear. And he only has 12T on him. That's all there was room for. And that's him. And so now we're going to assemble this together. We get our block with our hole in it, and our Callippic axle, and our Callippic 12-tooth gear, and I'm going to attempt the near impossible of putting this 12-tooth Callippic gear on this axle without breaking it. Actually might come better using the socket. And we'll just tap it in. Yep, a little more. Alright, and then we'll grab one of our small gear spacers and put on there to keep our gears separated, and then we'll get our Callippic idler 60-tooth gear, and we'll run our shaft on in. Now comes the fun part. We want enough room for this to clear a couple of gears. So we're going to take and set up a couple of gears. We'll grab a couple of 60-tooth gears out of the box, and we'll use that to kind of measure. And you want enough shaft sticking out to clear both gears, and a little bit. There's both gears and a little bit right there. That should be pretty close. We may still have to adjust it a bit. Now we're going to put two of these flange bearings on our Callippic idler axle. Tap this one on, and then we'll grab another one and tap it on the other end. And then come over here, and it should fit in just like that. And we're looking for a little bit of space between this gear and that gear while they're in mesh and held there, and I believe we've achieved that. And now we're going to move on to the Callippic axle, which is a short through shaft. Now we're going to go grab our short through shaft, which is actually going to be our Callippic proper shaft. So we're going to release another shaft out of the bag of stuff, if I can get it out. There he is. This one will become our Callippic shaft. The Callippic shaft gets one gear out of tray 4. It's a Callippic 60T, and it's pretty much identical to the Callippic idler 60T, only it doesn't say idler. And then we're going to just simply drive this gear, drive the shaft right into the gear, and this one should be about the middle of the shaft. We want enough room for 4 gears underneath it, and we'll put our two 52ZZ flange bearings on. I'll save that one for second. We'll put this one on first, and we'll tap it on just like that. There he is. And then we'll put our second one on. itty bitty thing. We'll slide it on there. And we may find that we have to have our other block of wood to drive that bearing on, because he has a hole that's deep enough to drive it in. So I'll choose one of these holes that I've used to drive a shaft way down in. And nailed it a little bit. Not quite there yet, so we'll give them a little more. And there he is. They're drove all the way down to the shoulder, and our gear spins freely on our shaft. And now we'll come back and kind of measure to see how we did on guessing. And I guessed him pretty close. That looks really good. Now we're going to move on to our Olympiad. Now on to the Olympiad assembly. For the Olympiad assembly, we'll need a short through shaft, which will become our Olympiad shaft, and our Olympiad 60-tooth gear, who is in tray 4. And here's our Olympiad 60-tooth gear from tray 4. And here's our short through shaft. It's going to become our Olympiad
axle.
And we're going to take and we're going to drive the Olympiad axle into the gear. Maybe. Yeah, it's going. And he doesn't have to be quite all the way as deep through, because he actually drives off of this gear. So I may have pushed him a little too far. Now I'll need a pair of these MF52 ZZ bearings from the pack. And I'll just drive them right on. There's the other one. Not quite. And there he is. Spins in his bearings just fine. And now we'll come over here and see that I have to push the gear back down just a fuzz. So I'll come over my big block and I'll knock him down. Just a fuzz. Let's see how he looks like. Just a fuzz more. That would actually have worked. And that is pretty good right there. A little bit more. There, that's almost perfection. Alrighty. So now we're almost 75% complete. Alright, now we're going to build the Saros drive axle. So we're going to go get our PDF, and it shows us we need a blind axle, and we're going to need a Saros 30T and a spacer. It's a 3mm by 12mm by 0.5 millimeter spacer and a Saros 53 tooth gear. So we're going to go, we got our axle out of the bag. We're going to go over here and visit tray 4. Then we're going to grab our 53 and our 30. And then we're going to go over here to our 3D printed stuff. And we're going to grab us a 12mm round with 3mm hole in the middle and 0.5 millimeter thick spacer. And we're going to assemble this bugger. So the first thing we're going to have is we're going to have this 30 tooth gear, which we're going to line up, put him over the hole. We're going to take the tapper, we're going to tap the shaft in like that and get him started. Then we're going to grab our 3x12 by half spacer, and we're going to push him on the axle just like that, and that'll space the gears apart where the teeth don't interfere with each other. Then we're going to get our 53 tooth Saros gear, and we're going to drive it right together. Now we're going to need a pair of the MF52ZZ bearings. And we're going to grab up a pair of these bearings. We're going to put them on the blind shaft. That one goes on a little easier than I'd like, but it'll work. And we're going to take and put that one on. Then we're going to take our blind shaft, since they're a little loose, over to a metal anvil. And we're going to fatten the shafts up by tapping on the end of them. And that locks that one on good. Let's tap this one on. And then fatten this shaft up a little bit. And there we have it. Now we're going to come over here. Since this drives off of this moon gear assembly, we're going to recover our moon gear, and we're going to turn him to where he's facing out. By now our glue is nice and dry, and our piece is in there solid, and everything turns nice and free and doesn't move around. And we're going to set this guy where he goes. He goes right under there and fits in that hole in the middle, just like that. Then we're going to bring this guy around, and he actually has to be made a little bit past halfway on so that this big gear can ride on the ring gear that we put in there. So we're going to continue to tap him down, and we'll feel of his fit. We're getting pretty close, but that's actually still a little tight. Just a fuzz more will be good. And that should work. What I'm feeling for is just a little bit of room in there for that to wobble if it wants to. And still make up with both gears. Of course, this is going to hold them centered when the back's on. Alright, and there's our Saros drive assembly. Now we're going to make our Saros gear, our Saros axle assembly. This is different than the drive shaft. This one actually contains the needle. It's a long through shaft. We're going to use our second and final long through shaft out of the bag of brass axles. And we're going to get him. And then we're going to visit tray number 4 again for a Saros 54T and a Saros 20T gear. And we're going to visit our 3D printed parts for a 4 by 12 by half millimeter spacer. And then we're going to assemble this assembly. The 20 tooth goes on first. He's a little too small for using that hole. So we're going to put him on as carefully as we can. Now I got this started on, we'll put our spacer on the 4mm shaft, and then we'll add our 54 tooth Saros gear, and we'll just put it in here, and we'll just drive the shaft right into it. You have to go quite a ways. Because he's got to be pretty tall, because he's actually going to be right here. And drive off of that. So we got quite a ways to go yet. And we got to put our bearings on. If we can keep from knocking that out, it'd be good. Let's put our flange bearing on. That one fit nice and snug. There's our flange bearing. And now we can see how much more we got to go, just a little bit more. That is not going to let me live it down, is it? There we go. There's our Saros Saros axle assembly. Alright, now that we got our height adjusted on our Saros axle, we're going to put the last big bearing on. It's a F683ZZ bearing, and we're going to put it on. I'm going to need my other block of wood that's conveniently holding this up. So I'm going to swap wood blocks and go ahead and drive this bearing on. Once I find the hole I use, that would be him. You have to drive this bearing all the way down. Still not quite there. Just a little bit more. And now we're there. See, he turns freely in them bearings. So now we're going to get ready to do the Exeligmos drive axle assembly. And that requires a blind axle, a 15 tooth Exeligmos gear, a small gear spacer, and an how do you say this, Mark?
Exeligmos.
Exeligmos gear, 60 teeth.
Excellent.
And why they name it something like that, I don't know. So we're going to need for that a blind axle out of our bag of axles. We're going to need from tray 4 the 15 tooth and a 60 tooth. And now there's only one gear left in tray 4 to choose from, the 60 for the next axle. We'll come over here and we'll grab us a small gear spacer. Three millimeter on inside, 8mm outside, and 1/2 millimeter thick. And then we will put the axle in it. I'm going to drive this axle in. Just a little bit. I'm going to put my spacer on. Then I'm going to put this tiny gear on. This 15-tooth job. Right here. Actually, I'm going to get my other block to do this. Put this tiny gear on one of these holes, and small holes in the block where the gear is supported. Let me line this up as best I can before I start driving it in. There it goes. And I may be a little further than I want to be, but we'll adjust it later. Then I'll put on a pair of flange bearings. Just the same as I always put on the flange bearings. And then we should be able to come over here and see how well that lines up. Oh, I'm going to need a little bit more, a little bit less axle sticking out. I'm going to come back over here and knock this down. Just a fuzz. And we'll see how that looks. And that looks more better. Just about right. So now we're going to make our last axle. You don't have to worry. Once we get it all done, they'll all stay together. Now we're going to do the Exeligmos axle assembly. There's only a short through shaft and a 60-tooth gear. The short through shaft is in our bag of shafts, and our 60-tooth gear is right here in tray 4. And we're just very simply going to put this shaft into this 60-tooth gear. With a little luck, it'll go real easy. And it just needs to come through just a little bit because it's going to line up with this small gear here. And then it needs a pair of bearings. So we'll put our flange bearings on. That ain't all the way on. That is. We'll put our other flange bearing on. That. Now that's all the way on, and now we'll try and set all of our gears up, and hopefully with a little luck they'll stay standing for us, even though this one doesn't seem to like to. And there's our group. And you'll find that this here standoff is going to have to be turned sideways so it clears the gear. Just like that. Okay, now we'll let this back down, hopefully without all our stuff falling out. And we'll prepare to put the back mechanical plate on. Now we're going to go visit tray 2 and grab our mechanical plate. This is this one right here. And we're going to give it a quick survey. And we're going to realize we have a hanging chad. You know, it's just the fuzz that it's hanging on, but it's still a hanging chad, and we're going to give it a quick overview. Have a look at it. Looks pretty good. We're going to get on our paint in the pane gloves. And we're going to look at it to see which way it goes. One of the dead giveaways is this has 3 holes in it right here where the crank is going to mount, which go against the 3 holes where the crank is going to mount, and that the holes for all these bearings line up with all these bearings. And once again, we like to knock our shafts out. Once we get this on, that'll be over with. And it is a little bit of an adventure putting it on, but we'll be okay. Then we're going to come in here, and it's not necessary, but it's advised to go ahead and countersink these holes where our screws are going to go to hold this on, because we have a beauty plate that goes on top of it. And if you don't countersink your screw holes, the beauty plate will be stood off. And then we're just going to do the 2 outer of these holes, because the actual beauty plate that goes on only has the center hole. And there we should be done counter. Oh, one more. That should be all the holes we want to countersink. And now we're going to pull the magic film off.
Just on the inside?
Just on the inside, yes, Mark. And then we're going to come over here and attempt the next to impossible and get all these little shafts through these little holes, which is always lots of fun. You know, these bearings may be a little stiff on this side. So let's actually take a bearing and pop a bearing in on this side to make sure the holes accept bearings. All right. And they do. So we're going to put these 5 axles on the top end first, and then we're going to capture our mechanical plate with a screw or two so that it quits moving around on us. Just like that. Fiddle with that. There, these guys are all solid and in. Even our center guy is solid and in. Now we'll turn it around and deal with this menagerie of stuff. Now we'll try and put these guys back where they go. He came out in the middle. There he goes. And our last but not least, this last step is actually a physical challenge. It's a test of your patience, courage, and skill. Not undoable, though. And there they are. Now we'll give them a couple of screws to hold them in place. And there we have it. Now your mechanical assembly is pretty much done. Give a view from the side to verify that all your axles and bearings are nicely seated. And they seem to be doing quite well. And now you should have a machine that would actually work if the crank was installed. We'll come in and give them a spin. And around he goes. So one of the ways you can check this thing to see that everything rolls is to take the cordless drill and lock it down on the main shaft in the moon, and then go ahead and roll your assembly, and you should see all your gears turning. So now we're going to prepare our crank and crank block. So we're going to visit tray 6 and get our crank and our crank block and our little capture for our crank block that fits right there that captures the axles. We're going to go to the axles and we're going to get our drive gear axle and our crank shaft. We'll probably get the drive gear axle and set that up first. And then we'll get our crankshaft too. We're going to visit our dwindling 3D printed stuff, and we're going to grab our crank bevel gears and probably a 24 tooth gear or two. We have a pair of them. And then we're going to get ready to assemble. We'll need a couple bearings. But let's get going on this. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to grab this crankshaft, which is a little bit backwards of the way that I said I was going to do it. And I'm going to put the crank gear on the crankshaft. Take my block of wood, line the flat spot up on the axle. I'm going to tap this crankshaft into this crank gear. Almost there. Yeah, I'm all the way there, by golly. And I'm going to put that in here so I can use it to gauge how I'm doing with the other axle. And once again, have to kind of use it to ream the hole that it goes in out, because 3D printed holes tend to have a little bit of boogers inside. And if you use the cut of the keyway and just turn it each time, it will clean all those little boogers right off. And you'll end up with a nice clean hole. And when you get to the point where it turns freely, you'll know it's clean. That's pretty good. So I'm going to leave that like that. Set it on my block. And the next trick, we're going to get this drive gear axle out. And we're going to install the gears that drive it from the crank. And so first, we're going to put the crank gear on, the drive gear itself. I'm going to have to move this off of here. Use my hole to put it on. I'll just simply drive it on, and want to drive it almost all the way down to the end. Just like that, where it's up against the end of the cut. We're going to add on a little 4mm spacer, which may or may not end up being necessary. We're going to put them on to start with. We're going to find our other 3D printed gear, and we're going to drive the axle in it too. Made it through. And then we're going to come and put a pair of MF52ZZ bearings on it. Being a bit stubborn, which is good to have a nice tight fit. Then we'll put this one on. Just like that, with them both snugly on there. Then we'll come back here and we'll see how this ends up fitting. We need this to fit where the gears mesh correctly. And sometimes that looks like it actually does. Pretty good job. Right there. So now we're going to put our crank on. Again, we'll line it up with our flat spot as best we can. We'll set this. That's why the hole's in the corner right here. Is for just putting this on. And then we'll drive that down. Almost there. You want a tiny amount of slop, but not a lot. And that was just a little too tight. Actually, no. That's pretty good. We'll live with that. And then we'll come back, we'll grab this gear assembly, and we'll press the bearing into the hole, which is actually a little bit of an interference fit. And then we'll press this one on. Just requires a bit of pushing. Let's knock lock this one on just a little further. And then we will put our screws in. And we'll put our screws in. Finish up, and now we should have a crank that turns our drive gear, and we're ready to install it into our device. And it should line right up with the main gear, which it does. And then we'll take our outer screws here, and we'll find the little screw hole in there. And we'll put these screws in. The two on the top, this one and that one, and the two on the bottom, this one and that one. On this side, we probably put all three in. Just a little snug on that. And now we should be able to grab our crank and make our device go. Alright, let's go to tray 2 and get this back beauty plate. Be careful not to mess our skin up. And we're going to prepare our back beauty plate for going on. And this can take a minute. We're going to take and lightly countersink our 6 holes. We're going to do it in the outside. The way to do that is to feel these 2 grooves. These are the grooves that the needles will ride in. Brush this off. We can leave this skin on for now, but we're going to have to flip them over and get rid of the protective film on this side. It would help if I could see it. And we're going to get rid of the protective film on this as well, because they're going to mate together. It's amazing how pretty and clear it looks after you take it off. And we're going to grab our bag of standoffs, and this should be pretty simple. There should only be 6 or 5 standoffs left, rather, because our crank acts as a standoff. And we'll get them out. And y'all have probably been wondering what the number 2 by 1/2 inch screws were for. Well, now we're going to use them to attach this beauty plate to our standoffs on this side. So we'll get a few of those out. We're going to probably need like 6 of them. There's 4, 5, and 6. Now we'll very carefully take our beauty plate and mate it up against the mechanical plate, and we'll start out by putting our 1 screw right here in the crank block since it's already there. And we'll get that screw started in there and we'll snug it up pretty good. Come around across the way from it to this side, and we'll set our screw in there, and we'll grab our first standoff and get our screwdriver in there and our standoff, and we will tighten it right on up. These standoffs have some extra holes in them. Most of them do for the corners. If you're going to put a acrylic skin on the outside, they have holes to hold the wooden sides on, and you'll want to have them in the correct orientation when you do, but they'll spin for you. You may end up having to swap one front to back when you get there. And we'll just get this last screw in with a little luck, a little pressure. There we have it, a mechanically assembled Antikythera device, and everything seems to work like it's supposed to. And at this point, time to pat yourself on the back and have a drink. Okay, now we're going to lay this thing on its backside on our boards so it's supported where we're not laying it on the shaft sticking out. We've got all of our supports in front to back, and we're going to do something scary. We're going to peel this off, and then we're going to attempt to put the needles on, and the needles are all in this needle bag, and hopefully MT got all of our stuff in here for us. We're going to undo this, and we're going to get these laser cut needles out, which may or may not be in the correct order, but Saturn is always the first, I believe. So we're going to set these down, and then we're going to peel the protective film off of our front. Because once we do this, where is the rest of our protective film? Okay. And we apologize that this may be kind of a chore because of the laser engraving, but we did this to protect this during shipping and to prevent the laser from burning the plastic while it was being created. It's almost impossible to do with the gloves on because you're going to need your fingernails to to get the little bits off. And once again, do not clean this with Windex or alcohol because it will cause it to crack uncontrollably. Alright, we've got the film removed from the front of this, and now we're ready to put our needles on. And we're going to discuss a little bit how we're going to figure out where to put the needles. So the easiest way is to go to eternalgadgetry.com and get Marco Scaleto's app for your Android or iPhone device and put the date in, and it'll tell you where all the needles are supposed to be. Thank you, Marco, for making this easy for everybody so I don't have to explain how to put the needles on to all these people, other than mechanically. So we'll take a picture of this and we're going to look for Saturn, and Saturn is up here in Aquarius. And so we're going to look at this and say Saturn's up here in Aquarius, and we're going to put the Saturn needle on right there where it's in Aquarius, which may take a little bit of doing. These needles fit really tight on purpose. And sometimes you may have to exercise the needle and put it on upside down to get it on there. This one's particularly tight. And there he snaps. And sometimes you may resort to have to take a flat screwdriver to kind of help him on. Be very careful not to damage anything. And pop, and there he goes. There's our Saturn. And we'll roll him back just a little bit into Aquarius where he goes. And then our next needle is going to be Jupiter. And we'll look at this and see that Jupiter is over here in Taurus, which is over this way. And we'll actually put him on upside down to feel that he actually fits, and you'll see he goes on upside down quite easily. And then we'll flip him over, and he's not quite as easy to go on this way as he was that way. And again, I think I'm going to resort to pushing him on with the flat screwdriver and holding him down at the same time. And click, there he goes. We'll roll him like that. Saturn in Aquarius, Jupiter in Taurus. And then we'll go on to Mars. And Mars is down here in Gemini. And see, Mars fits right on that way. So we'll flip him over and the fight will begin. We'll take the flat screwdriver and just give him a push and pop, and there he goes. And then we're going to come in here, and those should be our superior planets. Then we're going to get the date. This tells us what day it is. And we're going to look over here, and we're on December.
Mid-December.
Mid-December.
Upside down first.
We'll go upside down first. And see that he fits right on there. And yep, we are in mid-December. And boom, there he is. There's our date. And now we're going to go for some inferior planets, which would be Venus. And Venus is up here in Capricorn. Right there, yep. We'll put him on upside down first to verify he fits, and he does. And then we'll put him on, boom, like that. And there's our Venus needle. Then we have Mercury. Where is Mercury? Mercury's way down here in Scorpio. Let's put him on upside down first and verify that he goes. Yep. A little bit hard to see sometimes exactly what I'm doing. Things are getting small. And there he is. And then we'll come and get our sun. And the sun is right there. Imagine that. And he goes on pretty good. And there we have our needles. Now we're going to go through and start assembling the moon. I wonder where my paper clip went. Alrighty. Now we are going to deal with the moon. So I went to our tray of 3D printed parts and I got out our moon with moon gear and the white part of the moon. And we're going to put that together with a drop of super glue. And naturally the super glue has boogered up by this point. And we'll have to give him a paper clip enema. So we'll get the paper clip out and we'll give him a little paper clip enema, just like that. And we'll get us a drop of the super glue on the moon, just like that. And then we'll put the white part of the moon right there on the black part of the moon. And we'll very carefully press them together to make sure they're centered if you can. Don't want to get your fingers too much on the crack because the super glue will glue your skin instantly. Well, it takes a while to do the plastic, and we'll hold that for a while. And in a minute or two, it hopefully will be glued. So now we're going to visit tray 6 again for our 24 teeth sun gear with a hex hub in the middle. And we're going to have a 24T moon with a 3mm keyed hub. They're both the same size, same teeth. They mesh with each other. They mesh better if you put one upside down and one right side up. And so we're going to take our sun one, and we're just going to slide it right on that hex shaft, right up next to the sun needle, just like that. And there he is. And this next part, we got to find our moon phase axle, little bitty joker, right here. We'll get him out. And this moon phase axle goes in this little piece, which is also in tray 6. And this may require a little bit of doing to get it through, and there's actually 2 of them in there. If you find that one is more to your liking than the other, by all means use it. That one's kind of tight. Let's look at this one. Yeah, this one's better. See there, that goes in there much better. And we're again going to use the drill motor to kind of clean this hole out. because this needs to turn actually pretty free. So I'm going to grab this little axle in the drill and clean this little Delrin part up. And you'll see the little bit of gunk that it honed out right there on the flat spot. So now we need to put this 24 tooth gear on one end of this axle. So we're going to take it over to our block and bump it in. Till it's down flush. We want it nice and flush on the bottom. We want it all the way in with the little keyed hub all the way in the gear. And then we want our gear holder on. And verify that it turns freely. And then we're going to come and grab our moon drive gear and find the flat spot on it. We're going to drive this in. Now we should have assembly that looks like that. And let's make sure that we're all the way in. Both the gears. And then this assembly comes over here and slides down our moon shaft. Which may take some doing. Let's make sure this holds like it's supposed to be first. Alright, so if you look really carefully at this laser cut piece, the side that the laser cut from is a little bigger than the side it cut through. So what you want to do is just take your X-Acto knife and just kind of clean this out just a little bit on the back side, so that it goes on the axle shaft a little easier. And find your flat spot and line it up with the main axle and very carefully wiggle it on, and you'll see that it makes up and the gear makes up down there just like that. And there we have it. The next thing we're going to do is get this moon hub, and we're going to put the moon on it, where we can set it on here and it'll engage with this, and that there will turn around and spin the moon as it goes. Alright, so now we're going to go back to our axles, and you'll see there's one axle left that probably already has two bearings on it to make sure that they're on right. And then we're going to open this up and grab this out, and this is our moon axle shaft. And we're going to very carefully install it in this hub. And it's kind of a roly-poly thing. I change the design and put a flat spot on the back of it. But we're going to tap it right in there. Just like that. And now our moon shaft is in there. We're going to grab our now dried moon, and we're going to push it right on there like that. And then we're going to come over here And we're going to install our moon hub right on our axle, and it take a little bit of rocking motion. You don't want to beat on it because you got all those gears inside. And then once we get it in the right place, our moon will then interlock with this, and we need to take a look and see that our moon is over Jupiter right on our thing, and we are full moon just about. So we're just right. And there we go. We have a moon that will change phase as it goes around. Full moon to no moon, back to full moon. Just like it's supposed to. Alrighty then, we put our needles on successfully, we assembled our moon and put it on. Now we're going to start assembling these back needles that have a little springiness to them. So we're going to, that one there is already pretty much done. We're going to go to our needle set, and we're going to grab out the long needle, we're going to grab out the hub, and we're going to grab out the spring for the hub. And we're going to take the spring, because the ends of them are just a little fat sometimes, we're going to take the end of the spring and we're going to drag it down the file just a little bit to make sure that we don't have a little fat end on it. And then I'm going to thin it down on this end just a fuzz too, so that I can get it started in the hub. And you'll see that this end is now just a little bit undersized, where it'll fit in this hub a little easier for us. And then we'll just push it in the hub, in the slot in the hub. We'll just feed it in. Helps to take the needle nose pliers and kind of use them to stuff it through. And it may get kind of stiff because it's designed to be stiff in there. And once we get it through to a certain point, we can grab it from the back with the pliers and then roll the pliers, and it'll just drag it through. Well, that's way too far. We need to pull it back. Now that it's in there and through, we're in good shape. So now we're going to find out what this paper clip is all about. I already took part of the paper clip to make the pin for the other one. So we're going to straighten this paper clip out with our needle nose pliers pretty good. Get it nice and straight, because we're actually going to make a mechanical pin out of it. And then we're going to grab our hub, and there's a little hole right there that we're going to force our paper clip through, just like that. I always want to run it through once to make sure it goes through good. And then we're going to grab our needle. This is a guide to keep the spring on top of the needle. So we're going to put our guide facing our spring, and then we're going to put our needle in and run our pin through. Just like that, to where it comes just through. And then we're going to take our Jonard pliers, or our flush cutter, and we're going to just kind of cut the paper clip off. And there he went. And then you'll see that the spring works in the needle just like that. And that's just a little bit far, but it's acceptable. I'm going to pull the spring out just the tiniest bit. Where it kind of uses the middle of the spring guide. And then I'm going to get my razor knife and very carefully cut the excess spring off. just like that. And then I'm going to go back and grab my super glue, get rid of the little thing on there, and we're going to put 1 drop of super glue right on one side of the pin, just like that, so it holds it on there. And then we'll let him dry. So now we're going to take and put our set screws in. I already did that one to make sure it would go so I didn't look crazy. And we're going to just put our set screws in the back of the hub. This is what's going to tighten it up on the needle shaft. And we're just going to set the set screw in like that. Before we install these great needles, we're going to have to peel our back. So we're going to grab the film and we're going to peel all these little sections off. And there's a couple hundred little sections to peel. Alright, now that we've got all these little pieces peeled off of our plate, we're going to get around to putting these needles on. We're going to put the long needles on first. And we got a pointer that slides up and down the needle. And we're going to set the pointer in the track. We're going to bring the needle down here. And we're going to press it onto the shaft. Just like that. Gently. Might wiggle a little bit to make sure we don't set nothing out inside. Then we're going to take our Allen wrench and snug our set screw up. There we go. And this part, getting the Allen wrench in the set screw, is the hard part. There we go. And then we'll put our top needle on. And we'll just jiggle him right on down onto the shaft. And he's just a little off noon on the app, so we'll put him there. Both of them are in the second row. And so we'll tighten him up. Just like that. And there he is. And we'll get his pointer, which is right here. And we'll put his pointer on and slide it down to the second row where he belongs. And now we've got our big needles on. Now for our tiny needles, we'll go get them out of the needles bag. And there should be some extras of these that you should keep track of just in case one falls off and you lose it, because there's nothing that really holds them on except a little bit of pressure. And there are 3 extras just in case. And then we'll look at our app. Alright, so now we'll press the little needle on right here. And just press him down and make him right there about 7:30 is what the app said. And this one's about 3 o'clock. And we'll just stick it on a little bit of pressure and wiggle it right down. And we'll leave it at 3. And this guy here is also at 3, which points to nothing on the thing. So
no offset.
yeah. And there it is. And now our needles are installed. And now we should be able to crank our crank. And our needles on the back will turn and move and follow the tracks. We'll run him back where he was. And there we go. We have a completed mechanical Antikythera. that works.